For joining our webinar today on cybersecurity trends for 2016. We are super excited to share some of our knowledge with you, what we expect to start seeing in 2016. In 2015, there are so many changes. Things are really progressing quickly in the world of cybersecurity trends. So we want everyone out there to be prepared and kind of have an idea of what's going to be happening next. So before we get started, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of information about us. We are GadellNet. We are a St. Louis-based company. We were founded in 2003. Since that time, we have opened 2 more offices across the Midwest, so a total of 3 offices. We have an office in Indianapolis now, as well as an office in Wisconsin that we started earlier this year. Another fact about us is that we have been named to Inc. 5,000 fastest growing company, or one of the 5,000 fastest growing companies for 3 years in a row, and that's an accomplishment we're just really proud of. It really speaks to everybody's hard work on our team, so we like to throw that in there. I would also like to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, Brad. He is a great resource when it comes to security. I know that if I ever have any questions when I'm writing something up, that's the first person I go to. He is just an expert. So he's been with our company for a number of years now and has a lot to offer. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Brad.
Thanks, Callie. We put together 10 of the key areas that we see being susceptible to IT security as security becomes and continues to be a monstrous concern of small, medium, and obviously very large businesses. Overall, the disclosures and the impact of disclosures has been increasing exponentially year over year, with the average cost of an exposure at this point averaging $12 million to typically bigger companies for the detection, the recovery, the investigation, just overall managing the incident following an attack. Most of the measures are somewhere on the magnitude of $10,000 to $20,000 per day goes into responding to some of these cyber attacks. So while some of these attacks are a little bit focused on big business, they are also very appropriate to small business. And what we see and what we deal with on a daily basis is that there really is nobody too small, from the home user to the small business that might have, banking information or those types of transactions online. Everybody has data. Everybody has access to financials, and everybody is a target at this point. So we'll kind of jump right in, and Internet of Things is something that the term has been thrown around a ton, but really in the last 12 months we've seen where some of these things have really taken off. They've become very pervasive in terms of what's in people's houses, and now that bar has gotten so low that you're seeing some of these devices in people's offices, and the inclination to be buying something that's connected for the benefits that it brings you always needs to be weighed against several factors when it comes to what that object is. What does it have access to? How is it connected to the network? What is the manufacturer? What is the reputation of that vendor? A lot of these products are springing up, and it's so cheap to put these things on the network that it's very easy. They rush them out of the distribution centers, and they're sub $10, $20, $30, $50 items that no longer really have good IT controls. We're seeing a good trend on the plus side of things that are self-updating. So you're seeing a lot of devices that the manufacturers maintain an ability to apply firmware updates and patches over time, which is a great practice, and we hope to see that continue. But there are still a lot of devices on the lower end of things that require maintenance, whether it's in home or business use, for those things to be updated to the latest patch. So the implications of having everything connected are extremely convenient, but there are huge security risks, because once that device is on your network, it now becomes essentially a door to the internal network of your company, of your home, anywhere that where that device sits. So there's a paradigm in the manufacturing arena that has changed from the things connected to the internet before. You think of laptops and switches and hardware. These things were by manufacturers that had long-term client relationships with people, so that the incentives to keep those things protected and patched and very secure, while it wasn't great at first, over time as the landscape evolved, the manufacturers had to get better about creating better security for those items. With these things rolling off assembly lines everywhere, it's a different challenge, and there's so many different vendors at play. So hopefully we start to see, some competition amongst vendors in this space, making things more secure. But right now you have to look at every device that gets on the internet. If you can talk to it from your smartphone, it's a target. So hopefully those things have patching enabled, updates enabled, and you see that version increments over time, and you can feel a little bit better about that. But they're a big concern. Anything that gets plugged in that has an IP address that goes on your network should raise some red flags and should be discussed with whoever does IT services for you. The next item is connected vehicles, which is an expansion of the Internet of Things. What better thing to be connected than your car? It is a great, again, this is convenience in the sake of security, for the sake of security, or despite of security maybe. Cars are very connected, and more you're seeing the new models roll off the lines where connectivity, 4G LTE connectivity on a car is sold as a sales pitch, as a feature ad that does have a lot of appeal. But what is very unique in the car industry is that the design and the implementation timelines of cars is a very long time. So cars coming out now have been in design phases and been in manufacturing and those early phases for several years now. And so what we're seeing is that the technology that's getting added to the top of cars is great, super convenient, but there's just a very, very thin layer of safeguards in place between the car's, electronic audio systems and GPS and all that, and the connection to the car's CAN bus, which actually controls everything in the vehicle, the wipers, the gas pedal now, the brakes, tail lights, headlights. So there was a great article in Wired magazine that actually occurred and kind of took place right here in St. Louis by a few guys that were able to hack a Jeep, and they were able to log into Sprint's network and actually physically take control, and started out kind of as a game to see if they could get into the audio system. And once they were in there and they were able to turn the audio volume up and down and set the radio station and change the picture on the heads-up display, they were able to make one tiny step over to accessing the CAN bus of the vehicle, and they were literally able to turn the steering wheel, accelerate, brake, lock the doors, and a reporter from the magazine kind of chronicled everything. They stopped the car dead on the highway with his knowledge. So it was all a publicity stunt at a certain point. They had given Jeep, Fiat Chrysler 6 months notice, but these things are extremely dangerous. If you're worried about a webcam falling into some of the wrong hands, a connected vehicle is terrifying in terms of some of the ramifications of what could happen in there. So hopefully the little publicity stunt they pulled is a nice wake-up call to auto manufacturers that there's a lot of work to do in this arena, and they, just like the Internet of Things, have an obligation to make sure that their systems are updated timely and most importantly over the air, so that they don't require a service trip, or in this case Jeep sent out a USB key, which is a bad practice to even train people on, because that then could be hijacked for nefarious reasons. So connected vehicles is kind of an extension of Internet of Things. It's just a very specific example how these things can be convenient and be quickly turned into something dangerous. Moving on to Advertising and tracking. I think more and more people are aware of how kind of the business model of the internet has grown. And while the perception is so much on the internet is free, the reality is that most of the activities, your services that are provided on the internet, if anything is free, um, typically the site is gathering data on you. And everybody knows that Google collects, lots of data, and they're very pervasive across the internet. Um, but the advertising piece of it is really just the tip of the iceberg in this case. There's lots of companies that are using targeted, personalized approaches to marketing, and it makes it a more profitable endeavor. And the higher response rates you get because the ads are more relevant, they can charge better rates, and so the upside to that is that you might see less ads if they're more targeted towards you. The downside is that these ad companies are able to build extremely detailed profiles of what you do and how you interact on the internet. So it's not just that you went to Amazon, it's what you put in your cart and what you clicked on and what was the article that you were reading on CNN, and um, the amount of information growing in the tracking information is extremely detailed. So and you really don't get much of an opportunity to refute that or see it or understand how much data really is out there. And there's a lot of different competing technologies. So as browser manufacturers and vendors like Microsoft and Google add things in, like first it was pop-up blockers, now there's ad blocking. There's even ad blocking built into iOS 9 from Apple's perspective, and they now support third-party ad blockers. That's a great thing, but as fast as they put up the walls, the ad networks know that they can work around them in different ways. So um, there's there's a ton going on in the tracking space, all in the name of creating revenue, but it is a very big problem that most people don't quite fully grasp how much is being built out. The next item is a slant on the advertising and tracking, and it's actually a new term I think that's gained some steam in the last year called malvertising. So malvertising is essentially displaying malicious ads. So historically, the vector for IT security risk was going to a website that was not trusted, something kind of off the beaten path, something of it very non-legitimate. And so you could protect people by blocking those sites and making sure that people are only doing, especially in the business space, the business-related activities and those things. Malvertising is the injection of malicious ads on a very completely legitimate page and site. So Yahoo has gotten knocked already, and this week I can't remember who it was. A very specific, I mean, very big legitimate companies. So you're not going to block Yahoo, but I mean, in this picture that I included, the malvertising, the actual link is very real and looks very legitimate, and so it would be completely reasonable for somebody to go and read a news article and click on that link thinking that there was a benefit there. So the real risk of malvertising is that as the tracking networks have matured and the advertising networks have matured, they are big and they are distributed, and they are not done by the first party site. So CNN employs or deploys a advertising, I'll call it syndicate, for all of their advertisements. So um, it's easy to inject things and create code snippets essentially that go into those things, and they can be very targeted to end users. So it's just a new way of attacking people from what's a seemingly very legitimate source. Number 7 is mobile malware. There's a lot of talk about this, and Apple has so far stayed out of most of the crosshairs. Android is typically the whipping boy for this arena, and it still has not seemed to ever become the big risk that everyone anticipates that it's going to be. But um, it, this is also kind of in the arena like Internet of Things is, where the the trade-off between security and convenience is large. And so app manufacturers, just like the Internet of Things, there are lots of them. It could be a kid in his basement that developed a very simple to use app. And unbeknownst to you, it might be asking the phone for all kinds of data that it really doesn't need to allow you to play a game or to do a single purpose. So this is where reputation, I said trustworthy vendors, reputation of the vendor, the application developer, is a big thing, and and you don't see a lot of big apps that are widespread used apps that have big vulnerabilities, but it remains a big concern because while there are safeguards and there are guardrails for how apps get developed on these platforms, there is still a large capacity for those things to go wrong. Um, the way they store their data, transmit their data, and just overall the vast number of applications in this space is going to be a challenge. So download legitimate things, just like you in visiting the website, visiting sites on the web. You want to go to legitimate sources. Apps are really no different than that. So we'll move on to ransomware, which most people have heard of in the last 2 years. Um, Ransomware has become one of the most profitable and hard to combat things that we've seen, especially affecting small and medium businesses, because really the threat of these viruses or this malware really doesn't need a targeted person. As I kind of opened with, everybody has data, everybody has things they need on their network. Most people are doing their accounting somewhere internal. So once a virus or a attacker encrypts data on an internal network, um, the, there's a huge need to have that data back. And I guess I should step back and briefly explain. CryptoWall and CryptoLocker are a family of viruses that once they infect the target machine, they encrypt or they lock every file that they can get their hands on, typically Word documents, PowerPoints, Excel, anything usable. They've moved on to QuickBooks, and they can now access file shares, and anything they have permission to touch, they will encrypt. When they're done encrypting, they provide a message back to the user saying that unless you provide us X number of typically cryptocurrency dollars, and it's significant, 400, 800, $2,000, you will, we will we will delete the encryption key after 24 or 48 hours. So companies are really left with a choice to either pay the ransom or rebuild this data from backup, or if there is no backup in place, you really do have a very large problem. So this ransomware has become very prevalent because they don't have to target really anyone in particular. As long as they end up on a workstation that has access to data, it's been very profitable because the number of people that don't have backups in place are left with no other option other than to pay that ransom. And the way that they have grown, they have also created a nice little business model. So typically on these kind of ransom things, you don't expect to actually get the key or get the access that you're paying for, but it's very legitimate in terms of most of the people that have paid the ransom have gotten the key back. So it's not been a fool's errand. They will pay that ransom, which is very profitable for hackers, and it allows them to continue to perpetuate it. We have seen it with small business clients where they've gotten infected, and we've had no good option but to restore from backups. And the more backups you have and the more timely they are, the better off you are. But it's still a huge risk. Hopefully we see it dying down, but I actually see potentially an evolution of that moving into the next realm, which is the next slide, for data destruction. So if attackers have gotten to the point where they can encrypt all of the files. They are right there with the ability to delete that data as well. Right now, it's not as profitable. They have much more profit incentive to keep encrypting data, um, but the attack and the leverage that these attackers are able to get into business networks and personal networks leaves them the ability uh, to really wipe data. And I think that there's probably a couple of targets out there from just a pure publicity standpoint to be a power move, essentially, to say that we took down X company. I don't think data destruction, maybe in the small and medium business realm, is the hugest risk. I think you're more incentivized to pay ransom, but I think there's more publicity in a bigger, wider scale attack that at some point is going to happen. Somebody's going to have all of their data probably wiped out, and it's going to be a pretty significant event. This one actually plays into how they're getting in the first place, but if anybody read anything about the target breach, that their actual point of entry to the target network was a third-party provider. So it was an HVAC, heating and cooling vendor that worked with Target that actually had an online portal that was available, that Target was able to interface data to, and they hacked through, gained credentials to that web application, and sat on that box until they could figure out what their next move was. And after they exploited that, they were able to start kind of working their way into Target's network and ultimately to the domain controllers, where centralized information is stored, at a certain point creating an admin account for themselves, and then moving on to find the data, find first customer data and then credit card data, and then they developed a mechanism for exfiltration of that data. So it was a huge attack that had numerous and many points that things should have been stopped, but it all really started with a third-party provider. So it's a good wake-up call, one that your suppliers and your vendors and the people you work with are at risk, and you need to be asking them tough questions about how they treat your data. And it's also for anybody that is a third-party provider, providing services to other organizations. When you have these connections and you exchange data, and you sometimes it's just the association and having people that know people's names, and having some authoritative relationship between two companies. Any of those things can be used by attackers trying to get to perhaps a bigger fish or a more lucrative target. So third-party providers will continue to be a thing. How everyone exchanges data, and how and how these relationships are set up and spelled out, and guidelines for how you interact with the other company's data is going to be a big deal. Encryption regulation, which is probably the most boring tab in this presentation, but there's a big conversation going on in governments as to what the proper role of the intelligence community, namely the CIA, NSA, FBI, and what role they're going to continue to play monitoring and surveilling both internal to the US and external and into the rest of the world. And really all the major countries are seeing the same conversation happen in the UK, and in the European countries, and also in Australia and China as well. The regulation around what encryptions are possible. For years, the NSA and other intelligence groups had huge access to telecoms, and worked deals so that they could have access to the data as telecom companies provided it, and they're really looking to have the same types of access to these web companies and web communications, in particular the emails and and the instant messaging and the Skype, which is now owned by Microsoft, are huge targets because once communications moved off telephone lines and now to email and different means of communication, the ability to encrypt those communications and the ability for vendors to supply government and spy agencies the ability to subpoena that information and gain access to that information for very appropriate uses is a huge cat and mouse game. So the IT security community is very strongly against weakening any types of encryption that are already developed, and there are plenty of options that have been developed and standards developed that for encryption that is unbreakable. And so the IT security community has been very clear that this technology exists and it will be used by people trying to evade government surveillance, and it should be available to everyone as a matter of privacy, as a matter of protection for personal business use. Basically, the argument is that the technology exists, criminals are going to use it. Regulating or weakening encryption for the rest of us is a very bad move overall. So there's also obviously the perspectives that the governments don't really understand encryption, and the government bodies are very deaf to be able to handle those types of technical decisions, and so weakening security in commercial products mainly hurts the business community while doing very little to thwart any kind of communications of criminal and terrorist organizations. But the conversation is still going on. So vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure is something that we've seen as a risk, and it's probably the scariest risk of all. And it seems a little bit fluke-like that there hasn't been any huge attacks. Plenty in the movies, but never, at least in our country, there has been very little successful attacks on some of these big industry players. But critical infrastructure is really defined by financial services, government, transportation, nuclear reactors, water and waste systems, really the things that we take for granted on a lot of days. There's a lot of outdated IT systems and SCADA or large industrial systems that were developed 20 and 30 years ago that had really no focus on security at all. And these systems are large and in-depth and ingrained in some of these organizations that are still in place today. And so they're putting up walls at the perimeter around it. But I think the most impactful thing we kind of saw in the critical infrastructure is the U.S. attacking Iran's nuclear reactors several years ago now with essentially malware. But the potential exists so much here in the U.S., and it would be I think a very scary and a very big target from a terrorist activity standpoint. What could happen, how quickly it could happen, and the long range and wide scale of some type of attack in that arena. So hopefully it's another threat that continues to be at bay. There's so many ways that criminal and national cyber, we'll call them attackers, are able to generate income that right now it seems like the wave is on the data breach profit motive, but at some point that can very easily turn to the destructive methods, and the security community probably doesn't move fast enough, is not moving fast enough in order to do that. So this one's a bigger scale and more of a systemic thing, but it maintains its purpose here in small and medium-sized business, because we need to think about how our systems are backed up. What's our contingency plans, not just in technology, but also in paper, and how does your organization, what do they do in the event of a disaster? And disaster might be natural, and increasingly more likely that it might be man-made. And that's not a climate change comment. That's a IT security comment. But transportation or just standard utilities being shut down for some amount of time would very quickly throw a lot of small business in their business kind of right out the window. So, making sure that all these things are, I guess, in your control and documented, and that you have a response prepared for them. So, I think that was the 10th item that we had on the list. Callie, were there any questions?
So far, we have not had any questions on the question function or the chat within GoToWebinar. But if any of our attendees have questions now, you can feel free to just, if I can unmute you maybe, shout them out, or you can submit them under questions or the chat. Of course, you can always reach out to us later on if you have questions via email or whatever it may be. So does anyone have questions now? No, I don't think so. All right. Well, great. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you guys want to review any of this information, we will be posting this this webinar pretty soon. So thank you all again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.